Hola y bienvenidos a. Give me a sec. Welcome to week 8. Guys, weekly vivas are going to be back. I'm going to catch up this week, have them all done, and then there'll be no more of this where's Hope's next video, because it'll be right here. Anyway, today our question is, how did the British Empire shape the modern world? So, although the British Empire brought negative impacts, they ultimately created the modern world that we live in today. So, regardless of what you may feel about the British Empire and the colonialism and imperialism, it really did make the modern world that we live in. So let's learn about how the British Empire shaped the modern world. So there's 3 ways it shaped our world. It shaped our world through culture, politics, and trade. So first, let's talk a little bit about what the British Empire was. So, in the long 19th century, which is from 1789 to 1914, the British Empire hits its peak. And if you notice something about these dates, they have significance. So 1789 is around the time that George Washington became president of the United States. And then 1914 is World War I, obviously. So we see Britain comes to power right after the American colonies break from them, and they peak. They become this great and extremely stable empire, and they spread language and technology and culture and really make a global culture, one of the first global cultures. So then we can get into, after we understand a little bit about what the British Empire was, we can look at the first way that they made and shaped our modern world, which is through the British culture. I don't think we realize how much British culture shapes our modern world that we live in today. British culture spreads through things like their tea, through their sports, their language, and their food and technology and art and all of that stuff. And so firstly, language. Let's talk a little bit about the English language that I'm speaking right now. Sorry. Are you sure? I'm reading. Okay, I'm throwing this out. I almost said yeet. Oh, that's a sad moment. Anyway, so so language spreads, and the English language is really widely spoken. About 20% of the Earth's population speaks in English, and 60 countries are English-speaking countries. So that's a heck of a lot of countries that speak English as their language. And then we have sports. Sports come from a lot of the modern sports that we enjoy today. Come from Britain. In the 18th and 19th century private schools, there was a association of football and rugby that was played in the private schools, and those spread to all of the colonies, all of the British colonies, and sports like rugby, sports like American football and football and cricket all come from Britain. So those are some sports that we enjoy today. Baseball too. Don't forget about baseball. So those are the sports, come from the British culture. And then the arts. From this tiny little island comes artists like Shakespeare and J.R. Tolkien, and the Beatles, and those are really influential in worldwide culture, but they all come from the empire that was Britain. And then tea. Tea is so stereotypical of English people and of people from Britain, and it just really seeped into the culture. Seeped into the culture. Yes. And Henry James puts it, he says, there are few hours in life more agreeable than the hour dedicated to the ceremony known as afternoon tea. So this is this really enjoyable time, just drinking tea, and it's just such a rich part of the culture. And yeah, British people consume 4 pounds of tea per person per year, which is crazy. But yeah, tea's really big. And how did it come to Britain? It came through Catherine of Portugal, who was married to Charles II, who was one of England's kings. And she brings tea in her dowry, and she brings it to the noble court, and nobles soon followed suit in watching her drink tea every day. They started being like, hey, the queen's doing it, we're doing it. So that's what happened, and that's what she did. So yeah, that is British culture we see through the arts, through the sports, through the language, through the tea, all of those stuff. British culture shape our modern world. And then secondly, politics. Things like the Commonwealth, the Westminster system, and human rights all come from the British Empire. So the Commonwealth is a political association with, I think, 54 countries, and it was started with the British Empire and all of its colonies, and all of its like former colonies, and they stand today for political and cultural reasons, and are an association that tries to get things done together and unite cultures. And Winston Churchill says this about the Commonwealth. He says that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour. And then Nelson Mandela, the president of South Africa, and part of the anti-apartheid movement, he says that, quote, the Commonwealth makes the world safe for diversity. So yeah, that's one important system that's still in our modern world today. And then the Westminster model of government, or the parliamentary system, this contrasts the presidential system, which good old America uses, but it's another system and form of government that comes about in the time of the British Empire that's still around in many countries today. Countries such as Australia, Canada, and Spain all use the parliamentary system. And then the last part of politics that really seep through from British culture is the human rights movement. A lot of evangelical Anglicans in Britain championed for the end of slavery in Britain and in the world. And these leaders were called the Clapham sect. And these men included, this group included men such as William Wilberforce, Henry Thornton, and John Venn, who were a lot of these people were members of Parliament, and they all came together and really worked to end slavery in Britain, and paved the way for the new thinking about human rights and a new age. And Michelle Toussaint says that Britain considered it an imperial responsibility to enforce what we now understand today as universal standard of human rights. So she's really saying that they started this. Their imperial duties was to enforce the basic things we think of as human, and the basic standard we think of as human rights today. And then we're getting to our last point, which is trade. And trade, big part of the British Empire. And we're going to go back to talking about tea a little bit, so just keep sitting there waiting for that, because we love tea. So the imperial interests of Britain created a powerful naval force. Then this was a force that allowed a globalized trade system to emerge. And as we mentioned in talking about culture of Britain, tea played an instrumental role in establishing globalized trade. And from the slides, Dr. Parker says that Britain was instrumental in spreading tea production and consumption from China to India, and therefore making globalized trade. Ugh. And then we also see trade affecting the British Empire and us today in cuisine. Elite British people? I don't know. Elite Englandite? No. English. Brits. I don't know. They loved their spices. And they came to India for pepper. And the first time the East Indian Company comes to Europe, they come with 1 million pounds of pepper, which is it's a ton. I'm sorry. I just have to take a moment. Wait, sorry. It's really hard for me to sit in this window. Oh, rip. Oh, why did I say rip? Anyway. Focus. We're almost done. We're going to get here in 15 minutes. Anyway, they brought 1 million pounds of pepper. And essentially, as Lizzie Collingham, a spice historian, says, they flooded Europe with pepper. And so this need and supply comes for spices, and who fulfills it but places like China and India. And this establishes trade, as we talked about before. And in Collingham's book, The Hungry Empire, she says that, quote, Britain created a global network of commerce and trade in food that moved people and plants from one continent to another, reshaping landscape and cultural tastes. So this trade and all this stuff really interconnected, ultimately. But anyway, yeah, that's the British Empire. And we have to accept it for what it is and know that it did impact our modern world that we live in 3 ways. And those ways are culture, politics, and trade. Thank you for listening to my Viva. Come to nature's best. This is an unashamed plug for the cafe that I love and work in. Dr. Parker, if you're watching this, are you still vegan? Because we have vegan options, lots of vegan options. Yeah, that sounds creepy. But anyway, I just need to plug a local business, guys. Come to Nature's Best Cafe. Please come support your local business. Okay, bye.